Today we're going to be breaking down how five-star wide receivers can run routes. So this first route that we're going to be breaking down is from five-star wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. He's an Ohio State commit. We're going to be breaking down his comeback route. So let's play this thing full speed and then we'll get into it. So he attacks his DB's leverage off the line. Outside release, has this great violent snap down and then grabs his ball one-handed. Great catch, obviously, at the top of the break. So how is he able to get in and out of this break so fast? Obviously, he's got great explosion at the top of the route. He takes very, very few steps at the top of the route. How's he able to do that? And that's what we're going to discuss. But before we get into this route, you guys, if you're a wide receiver and you would like to train with us this offseason, we are going to be coming out to 14 more states across the U.S. for 2-day long QB and wide receiver training camps this year. So check out that very first link in the description below. If you guys would like to train with us, we are going to be coming out to Miami next, Las Vegas, Charlotte, North Carolina. All three of those camps are completely sold out, and the rest will sell out probably 2 to 3 months in advance, you guys. We'll be coming out to Portland, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta, Houston, Philly, Detroit, Boise, and Los Angeles. So again, guys, if you want some more information, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd absolutely love to have you there. Let's get back to this route here from Jeremiah Smith. So first route here, again, like we said, it's a comeback. So anytime that I got to run a comeback route and I have a DB who's lined up inside shade, right? He's inside shade for a reason. He is there to protect the inside. He does not want us to run to the inside. So if I have to run an outside breaking route, like a comeback, like an out route, hell, even a corner or a fade route, I got to give my quarterback enough space to the outside to fade me. So if my game plan is, oh, he's inside shade, I'm just going to go take off and run. DB's going to get hands and he's going to force me to the outside. His goal is to protect the inside, but also force me to the sideline to limit the space the quarterback has. So what Smith does here is off the ball, he goes and attacks this DB's leverage, right? This DB is inching back, trying to keep some space between him and Smith, because that inch back technique, like anytime that you're a DB, you have him and he sees, and he's this like catch technique, right? Where he's got a yard or two of space. His job is to keep that space. My job as a receiver is to close the space. So when he starts to attack this DB, he starts to inch back to maintain the space. So hopefully Smith picks a release and he could try to cut us off. Now Smith has great speed. So when he attacks him, he's able to just attack him, burst to the outside, and this DB cannot cut off this angle. I would like to see him maybe close a little bit more distance, because I think a quicker DB, maybe a little bit faster of a DB, would have been able to recover and cut him off at this angle. But nonetheless, he does a great job attacking the leverage inside to give more space to the outside, right? Just make sure that we don't keep a big gap, because if we don't have this kind of speed and we're not faster than the DB, we may not get away with this. Now, leading up into a comeback break, and this goes for any specific route, whether it's a 15 back to 12 comeback, whether it's a 5-yard hitch, all the way up to the break point, from start point to end point. You have to make this DB think we're doing what? We're running a fade, right? So selling fade, the goal is to get this DB to get out of phase, which essentially means you want his hips and shoulders to open up to the opposite end zone. So in order for me to be able to do that, I got to do 3 specific things. One, I got to run hard. You don't got to run as hard as you possibly can, out of control, aggressive arm swings, because we lose balance. But you got to be running hard. If you're running 70%, that's not enough. 75, 80, 85, that's not enough speed. A DB is going to be able to stay in phase, not fully commit his hips, and drive on our break. So we got to run hard. Number 2, when a DB is guarding us, where are his eyes supposed to be? He's supposed to be on my hips, right? So I have to have great body language going up into the top of the break. I need to almost think of it like I got a sled attached to me and I am pulling this sled, because when you're pulling the sled and you have this slight forward lean, DB doesn't know when a break's coming. A lot of wide receivers, right before the break point, when they drop their hips, they will raise their chest up, raise their chin up, because they're trying to drop down, but that raise up gives away the route. So it's keep that good body language, keep good speed, and then last but not least, kind of gave it away right there, you want good stride. You want to be taking long strides. Before the break point, I don't want my strides to start to shorten to prepare for it. I want to stay long strides, good speed, good body language. Now, at the break point, he obviously takes a minimal amount of steps. He takes 3 steps on this break, which is insanely hard to do, not to mention that they are on a grass field, which is absolutely insane, by the way. It's very, very tough to cut like this on a grass field, and no yard markers out there too, by the way, because if there's yard markers, you kind of can know where the break is. If there's no yard markers, you're just kind of going off of instinct and off of steps. And this is very, very impressive, right? So when he goes into the break, to be able to decelerate when you're selling vertical like how he is, good stride, good speed, good body language, I got to make sure that I'm violent with my hips. What does that exactly mean? That means that I'm almost pretending like there is a small doorway and I have to drop down so I don't hit my head on the top of the doorway as quickly as possible. I tell my wide receivers, you're playing musical chairs. The music stops, and when the music stops, you got to sit down. You have to sit down to a 90-degree angle with your lower body. Now, when you sit down, you want to try to literally touch your chin to your knee. Because when you sit and bring the chin to the knee, that puts your body in an explosive position as well. A lot of wide receivers, when they break down, they don't sit down enough. So they'll do the chin to knee thing, but they'll almost be leaning forward, and that creates extra steps and wasted time at the break point. If we can sit to 90 degrees and bring the chin even with my knee, that's an explosive position. Now, another reason why I say chin to knee is because a lot of wide receivers will sit down like this, but their chest is straight up in the air, and that'll make them lean back. Their weight can be distributed on their heels, and we lose explosion out of the break. Because it's not just about running, breaking, and then getting out. It's about running, breaking, and creating energy at the break so we could accelerate out and widen the gap from the DB. The goal is to be able to accelerate out, and it is a race to the ball. So that's why he gets to this explosive position. That is an energy creating position. Now, when he drops on that inside foot, that is called the trigger step. That trigger step is what ultimately drops your hips down. The second step of this break, and this is key for a lot of receivers to eliminate extra steps at the break. I want you to pay attention to what his second step does. He snaps, but look at the second step. You see how it pivots almost at like a 45-degree angle? Because when you pivot at a 45-degree angle, that's starting to turn your hips. And he can do this because he got low. A lot of wide receivers, when they drop down, they'll snap their hips, they'll drop. But when they don't get low enough, they'll try to do this pivot step, and they're almost standing tall, and that leg can almost like extend. And that puts a ton of pressure on your knee, your Achilles. It's a great way to hurt yourself. So to be able to do this, you have to get low. We just lower the center of gravity. We pivot, third step hooks. And this third step is my drive step. I'm trying to push off of it. Snap, pivot, hook, push. And that explosion right there is what will get me out of the break and help me win the race to the ball before this DB can get there. So let me play this full speed one more time. This is a perfect example of how you guys can run a comeback in the minimal amount of steps here from Jeremiah Smith. Now let's get into some other routes from some other five-star wide receivers. So now, this next route here is going to be from former five-star wide receiver Brandon Inniss, and he is a wide receiver that plays currently now at Ohio State. He is a freshman at Ohio State. This is a great example of him executing a slide release in high school. So let me play this thing full speed, and then we'll break it down. So when he comes off the ball here, he does this kick step, slides to the outside, attacks this DB's vertical, and then he's able to get some separation on this slant. So a slide release is pretty much exactly how it sounds. You are going to slide to the outside, attacking this DB's outside shoulder, outside hip, trying to make him think that you were doing something called a slide and go release. So a slide and go release is something that you see a lot of NFL wide receivers do. They slide to the outside. They give this little shuffle. You see guys like Stephon Diggs do it, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, but they will slide to the outside and they make this DB make a decision. And when they have to run a fade, they'll slide. DB sits to the inside, then they go. We were trying to make my releases and make my routes look the exact same. Five-star wide receivers, Power 5 wide receivers, NFL wide receivers all are calculated in the way they run routes, and they can make things look the same. We're going to show an example of this slide release on a whip route, not just a slant route, in a second, and how they pair the two together. So he comes off the ball again, like we said. He slides to the outside, trying to make it look the exact same. Now, this slide does not work if we don't attack vertically on a 45-degree angle at his outside shoulder and his outside hip. What do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, I wanted to run a fade because everything's built off of a fade. The slant should look just like your fade. So let's say we do this slide release and we slide, but we stay behind the line of scrimmage and we slide out here. Even if that DB sits to the inside, and then I try to push up vertical, he can cut me off to the angle or get into my hip and force me to the sideline, right? So for that slide and go to be able to work, what I need to do is off the ball, I slide and I need to attack past the line of scrimmage at almost a 45-degree angle at his outside shoulder and his outside hip. Make him make a decision. He could either jump to the outside, and if I have to run a fade on that slide and he jumps to the outside, okay, cool. I could just take the inside release, stack, and go run a fade. You see guys like Devontae Adams do that a lot if he overcommits. Now, if he sits to the inside, I could just slide and then go. Now, let's say I have to run a slant, right? So I have to run a slant. I've beaten him before on that slide and go. I make it look the same. I attack at the same angle. I have the same slow, patient release. This DB's been beat on it before, so what does he do? He expects it. He jumps and he overcommits to the outside. We could maybe sell it by using some type of crossover, and that's what Inniss ultimately does here, but that gets the DB to jump, and then that's the separation that we have on that slant versus inside shade press. Now, Now, why even use this type of release? Why not go with something different? Because remember, this DB's inside shade. We talked about this in the last example. His goal is to prevent the inside route and force me to the outside. So if your goal on a slant is just, oh, I'm going to give him a quick little move and then cut in front of him and then run my slant, he's not going to give up the inside, especially if he is a talented DB. How I make him move when I got to run a slant route, he's sitting right even with the break point, attack his outside shoulder and outside hip. Could he do something faster? Could he attack that outside shoulder for 3 hard steps? They call that a diamond release. Absolutely. But he uses the slide to add a little creativity to it, to add a little bit of sauce to it, and just to get this DB off, get this DB guessing pretty much, right? So now, on this slide release, to be able to attack at a 45 and be patient, let's talk about the technique here. Pay attention to his first step. The first step he takes is with his back foot. You look at all elite level wide receivers in the NFL, they all start their releases with this, like I call it a kick step. They all started with this kick step. He kicks behind, and what that kick step does is that loads up your hips. It loads up your hips so you can explode. This step is for explosion. A lot of coaches will say this is a false step. It is not a false step. So he kicks behind, loads up his hips, and that shoots him outside at that 45 to make this DB make a decision. That's very, very important step. Because if you just try to slide without the kick step, you don't have that much explosion, and it is very hard to attack vertical on this. You'll feel like you're not really going anywhere with this slide release. Okay, so now when he gets to that slide release, see how he's taking these steps? I call them gather steps. He slides to the outside, and those feet are quickly stepping inside of his shoulder frame. Those are gather steps, and his feet are inside of his shoulder frame. So when he throws this outside fake, you see how far he can sell it. You see how he steps outside his frame, his hips, his shoulders. Everything looks like he's doing that slide and go release to get that DB to jump, and then he can win. So that's the reason why the slide release. That's the science behind the slide release of why we would use it, and that's the technique behind it. So this is a great example here of Brandon Inniss executing this in practice and getting separation on that slant. So there's a 5-star wide receiver out of Texas here. His name is Taz Williams Jr., and this is another great example of slide release, but using it on a different route. Because again, remember, like I said, all 5-star wide receivers are very, very calculated. They know how to pair their releases together. They know how to make certain routes look like other routes. So let's take a look at this. He is running a whip route, right? And he's got a DB who's inside shade. So let's watch what he does here. So he comes off the ball, slides, gives a move, whips it out. And then you see the separation that he is able to get on this. So let's talk about it, right? Inside shade guy, how would you run a slant? We talked about it. You wouldn't give him just a quick move outside and then cut inside and then go, because this DB is not going to give up the inside shade if he is good. His whole responsibility is to protect the inside, do not give it up. So what would we do? We would attack his outside shoulder, attack his outside hip, try to get him to open up his hips to a fade or a slide release to make it look like we're running a fade, and then slip under him, right? Giving my quarterback spacing and ultimately getting separation. So if I have to run a double move like a slant and go, like a whip route, like maybe you're running like a jerk route where you fake a whip and then you cut back inside, you got to make it look exactly like how you would run the slant. That's the only way that we get this. Because if we try to square up this DB and attack, he's not expecting a slant. I have to run it the exact same way, especially when DBs watch a ton of film and they know what we do on specific routes with our releases. So he comes off the ball. He gives this move called a prep step on his slide release. So this is something Brandon Inniss could have used in the last example. You see how his front foot just takes like this tiny jab step to the inside? That's the same thing as a kick step. It creates energy. It's a part of the release. It's not a false step, and he's going to push off of this to get him going on his slide, right? So he gets move, slips back underneath, and again, making sure anytime that we're running a double move, the details matter, you guys. Like that first example we talked about with Jeremiah Smith on that comeback, from start point to end point. He wanted to think about what? Selling fade. Like he was pulling a sled. He had long strides. He had his eyes, his shoulders. Everything was committed vertical. So on a double move, you need to translate that to selling the slant. When he breaks to the slant, I want you to see how much speed he has. He's got a good speed. Hips, shoulders. It looks like he's pulling a sled. He's taking long strides, then bam, puts the brakes on, drops his hips violently, and then he's able to get out of this thing with tons of separation, and he is wide open. So guys, there's a lot of elements to that route right there. Making things look the same, pairing releases together, and then selling that slant on a double move. That is a textbook route there. Let's play this thing again full speed more time. It's a shame he didn't get the ball. This is a very, very good rep. All right, fellas, really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys got some value out of that video, and I hope it was really able to help you out. So again, if you would like to train with us, fellas, 14 different states this off season, check out that very first link in the description below. All of our camps will sell out probably 2 to 3 months in advance. So again, very first link in that description below. I'll see you guys next time.